Welcome back to Horn Takes, your Texas football and baseball talk destination. I am Sean Redfern. It is Sunday afternoon, right ahead of NFL playoffs. So I thought I'd get in this show. We're going to be live on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok again. Shortest ban of all time. I guess they did like a self-imposed blockage of US TikTokers because of just all the stuff. They just wanted to make sure they weren't going to get in trouble by the US government. So good due diligence on their part, I guess. We're live on all three. We're going to do a 2024 Horn Takes podcast football award show this afternoon. Be a pretty quick show. But I thought the only way to be legit as an organization is to actually give out awards, right? So I've been thinking about this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I actually contacted the University of Texas somehow. I forgot who I contacted. It was a while back, and I never followed up on it, and I probably should have. But you know how they talk about how some people have more money than sense? Well, I don't have either, but I was really big on the idea of actually getting some awards made up and sending those things to the athletic department and sending them to the guys that won our awards. So I don't know, man. Maybe one day, like in 150 years, they'll be doing like the Horn Takes podcast All American team or something. I don't know. Be kind of cool. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. And yes, folks, TikTok is back apparently, so good on that. If you want to join the chat today, too easy. Go to the YouTube channel, jump into the stream, join the chat there. Or if you're watching on X, you can just simply click on the link that pops up in X, and it'll bring you to a bigger showing of the stream, and you can chat right off to the right. So I got a chat box up. If you want to chat, let me know. If you think my awards suck, that's fine too. We're gonna give out 4 today, and we'll probably expand this over time. But I thought 4 was pretty good to start off with. We're going to do an offensive MVP, a defensive MVP, and then an offensive and defensive newcomer of the year award. So I kind of just did some nominees and we'll go through that. But I put some polls out as well on Twitter because I was interested to see. I started those yesterday. Generally, the default on a Twitter poll 24 hours. So I knew I was doing this show this afternoon. I'd already worked through who I was going to pick and all that good stuff, but I wanted to see what the fans had to say. So I did some polls. So for the MVP awards, we'll see how that goes. Uh, anyway, offensive MVP nominees. I think you got to start with Quinn Ewers. Almost 3,500 yards passing on 65% completions, 31 touchdowns, another 2 touchdowns on the ground. He's the quarterback. Had a good season. I don't think you can talk offensive MVP without talking the quarterback if he's had a good season. And I think Quinn Ewers did have a good season. So he's definitely in that conversation. One that one that was pretty interesting is I was sitting there working through it and I actually looked over at my wife and said, if you had to pick who you thought the offensive MVP was this year, who would you pick? And she threw out 2 names, and the next 2 names, and one of them was one I was actually thinking of both of them, but I thought it was interesting that she was thinking this one as well. I think Trey Wisner's the guy you got to talk about when you talk about the offensive MVP for Texas this year. North of 1,000 yards, 4.7 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns, and then he added another 311 receiving yards and a touchdown. So a guy that's kind of been steady Eddie all year long. He's been there. So again, I think Trey Wisner's a guy that you have to talk about. And the other one, Matthew Golden, almost 1,000 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. Really can't talk about how the season went down the stretch offensively without talking about Matthew Golden, because Matthew Golden was a huge part of it in the passing game, especially with Bond out. Bond kind of went down late in the season. Matthew Golden had to kind of step up and be some glue there to keep that offensive passing game going. And he stepped in and did really well for the most part down the stretch. So those are the 3 nominees for offensive MVP. You guys let me know what you think. If you think somebody else, I did on the poll put another, and I got some other votes, but they didn't put in the comments who they were voting for. So I have no idea who their guys would be. I'm an offensive and defensive line guy, so I was thinking about, like, I almost wrote down I almost wrote down Cam Williams for newcomer, offensive newcomer, but I decided not to because I figured, how do you quantify that? Like, how do you? It's kind of hard. They don't really keep good stats for offensive linemen, which just continues to further the disrespect that the big guys get in their ability to change games. Yeah, as far as I know, and maybe like PFF or something like that, there's probably some service you can subscribe to that'll keep all the stats for offensive linemen. And I know PFF does like their little rankings or whatever, but I want to see like how many pancakes did my man get? How many? It's probably all on PFF. Maybe I just need to get a subscription to PFF and I can stop wondering. Defensive MVP nominees, and these are interesting too. Well, maybe not. I think most people, if you picked your MVPs on the defense, you'd get one of these three names. Ant Hill Jr., 113 tackles, 16 and a half tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 1 interception, 1 pass breakup, 4 quarterback hurries, a fumble recovery, and 4 forced fumbles. So Ant Hill, statistically, you look at that guy, and I didn't realize. I mean, I knew he was having a good year, but I didn't realize it was this good, man. That guy, pretty outstanding. And then you cannot talk about MVP on defense without talking Jade Barron. 67 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, sack, 5 interceptions, 11 pass breakups. And I think that one is one that's you just don't see a big number like that generally on pass breakups. 2 QB hurries, a fumble recovery. And listen, guys, he was the highest rated defensive back in the country by PFF with any defensive back over 100 snaps. There's some other stat like he his longest reception given up in man coverage was 9 yards or something like that. So just an unbelievable cover guy. And by the way, I want to reiterate again. When they started talking about moving Jade Barron out of the star position and putting him in the true cornerback position last offseason, I was really down on that idea. Not so much because I didn't think he could play cornerback, but I just really felt like, man, he excels at the star. He plays really well around the line of scrimmage. But I got to admit, there was some doubt in my mind after that Oklahoma State game, that Big 12 championship game, where I'm thinking, man, can this guy cover guys in the SEC? And man, he has done an outstanding job this season. So kudos to Jade Barron. Obviously worked really hard. That's a different position, different things to get used to. So what a great player. What a great testament to coming back, putting in your dues. He's going to be a really highly uh, drafted guy in the NFL. So kudos to him. And then my third guy, Andrew Makuba. And I think on defense, there was just so many good players that you could probably you you could probably pick a number of guys, but I just felt like these three guys were the ones that really sort of stood out. Andrew Makuba, 69 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 5 interceptions, 6 pass breakups himself, 1 quarterback hurry, and forced fumble. So those three guys, to me, clearly your top three candidates for defensive MVP. Offensive newcomer of the year, our nominees. You got to go with Matthew Golden if he's in there as the offensive MVP. He's got to be an offensive newcomer, and this one's kind of tough. Usually, I would reserve an award like this for like a younger player, a freshman or something like that plays. But to be quite honest, I mean, I guess there was a couple guys, and they're in here too, but there just wasn't a lot of guys new on this offense. It was a pretty experienced offense, or they brought guys in that were experienced out of the transfer portal. So Matthew Golden again, 987 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. Ryan Wingo's a guy that made this list, 472 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Almost a 17 yard per reception average, which is really outstanding. Shows a lot of explosiveness down the field. And then he added 100 yards on 5 carries, those jet sweep type deals, little pitches to him, whatever. He did really well on those. And man, he almost broke a couple of them, including that one in the Cotton Bowl where Caleb Downs just got his foot or shin or something, tripped him up. And then the other guy, DeAndre Moore, 456 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. So he had a big year from a touchdown perspective. Flip it on over to defensive newcomer. Nominees, Andrew Makuba. We talked about his stats. Really good, outstanding play. The whole secondary really was really good this year. It's stat wise, the secondary was good except for uh, Manny Muhammad, who's gotten beat up a lot by Texas fans over the course of the last few weeks, last few games. Uh, Again, I need to get on PFF because I really want to see I think that's a good service. I don't know. I think it's a good service to get some different statistics from, like not just your standard stuff. Like I think they obviously dig in a little more on some of those things, which I think is good. I think the more you can dig into stuff and really tell the whole story, the better. My whole thing is how do they rate all those players? I mean, during the regular season, they're looking at what, 65 games a week, 60 games a week, and going through and rating all these players. How many people do they have doing that? And how long do they spend doing it? I really be interested in knowing what that process is. But anyway, I'll digress. We'll learn about that some other time. So Andrew Makuba, Defensive Newcomer of the Year nominee. Colin Simmons, 48 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, an interception, 2 pass breakups, 9 quarterback hurries, and 3 forced fumbles. And then another guy, man, Trey Moore. He's not a young guy, but a new guy. 36 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 1 pass breakup, 6 quarterback hurries, and 2 fumble recoveries. So Trey Moore was a guy to me that a lot of people were down on earlier in the season. I saw a lot of people saying, "Why is Trey Moore in the game? Why isn't you know, why do we not get somebody else in the game?" And I just kept thinking to myself, man, he's getting pressure. Like he gets a lot of pressure. He's just not getting home. And finally, towards the second half of the season, and here really lately, he started making a lot of plays and actually getting home. So kudos to Trey Moore. I think he led his conference in sacks. He had 14 sacks, I believe, at UTSA last season. That's just a different game, man. You're dealing with just a different type of guy that you're going up with play after play after play in the SEC than you are in whatever that conference is that UTSA is in. So took him some time, but he started producing. So good for him. Now let's get into it. Offensive MVP, folks. This was a tough one for me. Uh, I'll be honest. I talked the other day. I had CJ Vogel and I had Eric Henry on the show, and I talked about the offense in 2024 just not really being all that great, man. Just not kind of explosive in spurts. I would say definitely explosive in spurts, but just not real consistent. Certainly not a lot of consistency in the running game. And I just didn't feel like really anybody stepped up and was that one guy on offense. And maybe part of that honestly is because there's a lot of guys on this offense. I mean, they're gonna send Gunnar Helm, the tight end, to the NFL. They're gonna send 2 wide receivers to the NFL. Silas Bolden is a guy that didn't start at Texas, but you got to think he's a guy that's going to get into a camp somewhere in the NFL. And if he works really hard, he's going to stick because the guy's got really good skills with the ball in his hand, especially in space. So you got to think he's a guy that's going to stick. Jaden Blue is a guy that is the same type of guy to me. Different body build, obviously, but just really dangerous in space. If he gets in the right situation in the NFL, he could be a guy that has a really good career in the NFL and is kind of like I don't want to say a star in the NFL. I mean, he could be a star in the NFL, but you just never know with some of these guys. But certainly a guy that can stick and stay in the NFL. So there was just a lot of different guys. And then they're just bringing people off the bench to come in and play. A lot of different guys. So really tough for me to look at this offense and go, man, one of these guys was just the guy. Obviously, Quinn Ewers had a great stat line, but you know what? I think if you compared Arch Manning to Quinn Ewers through the first so many attempts they had, they're almost even in terms of completions and all that stuff. But Arch Manning by far had more yards than Quinn Ewers. So, and I'm not trying to drum up the Arch Manning Quinn Ewers debate or say Arch Manning was better. I'm just saying if your backup comes in and he's doing the same types of things, I don't think it's that quarterback position necessarily that's the MVP. And then obviously with Quinn, there were games where he wasn't very consistent. And some would argue, and I'm not one of them, but some would say, yeah, they won games in spite of Quinn Ewers. So uh, he only threw for 300 yards 3 times. He did it for Florida. He did it against Georgia in the SEC championship, and then again at Arizona State. Everything outside of that was in the 200s, and he had a couple of games this season where he was under 200. Trey Wisner, Texas's 5th straight 1,000-yard rusher, added another 300 plus receiving. But Wisner only had 4 games over 100, and we just said it, man. The Texas running game inconsistent at best in 2024. And then you look at the games that Texas lost. The running game just wasn't there at all. Wisner tallied 149 yards total in those 3 games that Texas lost. And I'm not saying that's Wisner's fault. Just saying that's what it was. So again, I look at Quinn Ewers, I look at Wisner. Hard for me to say those guys are the MVP for the offense because there was times where they weren't there and the team won. Matthew Golden, he led the pass happy Longhorns in touchdown catches and yards. I thought he really burst onto the scene late last quarter of the season while Bond was out. We talked about that. One of the things I really like about Golden, he was pretty consistent. He had 9 games over 50 yards receiving. Had 162 against Georgia in the SEC championship game, 149 against Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. Had that big touchdown catch that sent Texas into double overtime against Arizona State. He had a big catch late in the game in the Cotton Bowl that got Texas down there on the 1-yard line. So I thought he was a really big part of the offense late in the season and really consistent and probably one of the only guys on the whole team that was consistent throughout the season. So given Texas's proclivity to passing and the fact that he was the most consistent one throughout the season, including again down the stretch in the postseason, your 2024 Horn Takes podcast offensive MVP, Matthew Golden, folks. So congratulations to Matthew Golden. I thought he had a great season. And this one was interesting to me. The fan vote was Matt Golden as well. So we were right on with the fans on that one. Defensive MVP. This one, not as tough as the offensive MVP to me, but still kind of tough, man. All 3 of these guys are all SEC guys. You got a Thorpe Award winner in there. All members of one of the best defenses in the country in 2024, obviously. And these guys all ball hawks. 11 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and 5 forced fumbles between them. Here's the deal, though, folks. 2 of those guys got to play in maybe the most talented Texas back end since 2005. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that. If you got better one, let me know. But I thought this secondary just ridiculously talented, and then I thought the other one was a star against the run, star against the pass, and a star rushing the passer. And this one, I went off the rails a little bit. I went a little different than the fans on this one, folks. Your 2024 Horn Takes podcast defensive MVP, Anthony Hill Jr. 35 more tackles than the closest tackler. Very versatile player. We talked about it. He was good against the run. He could come up on the outside and play off the edge. He could blitz up the middle. He could get back in coverage and make plays. Led the team in tackles for loss, second in the team in sacks. He was an absolute turnover machine. Just whether he was recovering it or just taking it away so somebody else could recover it. I just thought Ant Hill Jr. had the most outstanding. And I think you take, and this is going to sound crazy, you take Makuba or you take Jahdae Barron out of that defensive secondary, and I still think you have a pretty good defensive secondary. I think you can still make plays because I think that that defensive line was just a lot better this year, just a lot more pressure from the front. And we've talked about this for 2 years on this show. You get pressure with the front 4 on defense, and it makes the back end's job so much easier. Fan vote on this one was Jahdae Barron, and look, I totally understand that. I 100% get that. I just feel like for my money, if I'm looking at the most valuable guy, I mean, take Ant Hill Jr. out of the defense. Who is the Ant Hill Jr. guy? That would be just kind of how I would start that discussion. Offensive newcomer of the year, Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore. I thought they both had very similar seasons. Wingo a little more explosive, a little better on yards per reception, and then obviously versatile. They handed the ball off to him several times this season, and he knew how to go make plays with it when he got it. Moore with more touchdowns, and I thought Moore really got down the field well. I'm really excited about both these guys because I think either one of these guys have what it takes to step up and be wide receiver one next season. That wide receiver sort of battle, I think, this fall is going to be real. I guess here in the spring, because I think a lot of those guys that are in that freshman class are already on campus. So it'll be really interesting to watch those guys and see what comes out of those battles and really which cream rises to the crop, because there's a lot of cream in that wide receiver room. But at the end of the day, he's the offensive MVP. He's also the offensive newcomer. 2024 Horn Takes podcast, offensive newcomer, Matthew Golden. Again, man, just an outstanding season. He was a few yards short of 1,000, which is a big deal. So congratulations to Matthew Golden for picking up his second 2024 Horn Takes podcast award. Defensive newcomer of the year, Colin Simmons is a guy to me that you saw his reps increase over time. He got on the field very early in sort of limited capacity, and as the season wore on, and he got better and better against the run, because I thought to me that's where he struggled the most early on was the run. But he started getting really good at that. You could tell they spent some time with him. One thing I really like about this coaching staff is stuff that I notice, and I don't notice it all, but I'll notice stuff and just go, man, that's not how you're supposed to do that. And then you almost see it immediately within the next couple games. They've improved in that area. And this is going to sound crazy, but that means the staff is watching and coaching. It's one thing to go, guy, you're not doing this right. It's another thing to be able to coach somebody to do it right. So kudos to the staff for being able to do that stuff. I thought Colin Simmons kind of went from that raw guy that you just have no idea what he's going to do on every play, but it's going to be athletic and he's going to pop off the screen at you, to a guy that started to really figure out how to play football. I am super excited to see what he can do in his sophomore campaign. I don't think you could really go wrong picking any of these guys. Andrew Makuba was a nominee for the defensive MVP for us. Trey Moore, again, he really came on late in the stat sheet, but I thought he was good all season. Your 2024 Horn Takes podcast defensive newcomer of the year, however, is Colin Simmons. I just can't get away from just how explosive this guy is. Cannot wait to see what he does with another spring, another summer, in terms of his physical development, his skill development, his technique development. Absolute star in the making. And I have a feeling that we could see both he and Trey Moore in the defensive MVP conversation next year, because, again, a lot of Texas fans down on Trey Moore, especially early on in the season. But he was putting in work. It just wasn't showing up. It's a lot like Alfred Collins. You can't just look at what Alfred Collins does every week and go, oh, he doesn't have any stats. He must not have had a good game. Alfred Collins has had so many good games this year. It's unbelievable. And a lot of those games were games where you just, if you went down the stat sheet, you go, man, was Alfred Collins even in the game? It's not like running the foot. It's not like an offensive thing where you go, man, they must have had a good game, because you can see it. On defense, there's a lot of different things you have to look for, and I thought Trey Moore did a lot of those things really well this year. Appreciate you guys checking us out. Appreciate those 2024 Texas Longhorns. Well, I don't know, man. We wrapped up last week with C.J. Vogel and Eric Henry. We'll probably find something else to talk about, and we'll certainly start talking about this 2025 group as we get through spring and into the spring game and all that stuff. So we're really excited about that. We're excited about our baseball coverage that'll be coming up. Speaking of that, we're going to have more details next week. But we're going to start talking some Texas baseball, and we're going to have Chuck Ertley on the show next week. We're going to have Mark from Occupy Left Field on the show next week. And we're going to have our friend Mike Hardball Harge on the show next week. We're going to do three shows, two of them live. And we're going to talk a whole lot of baseball and get you guys ready. February 1st, the guys will be playing the alumni game. That'll be the first chance to look at this new team. Again, guys, find us on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. We sure appreciate any support. We love the interaction, so hit us up on YouTube. Email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com. with all your questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. Congratulations to those 4 gentlemen for being outstanding football players. And by the way, just a whole lot of outstanding football players. We couldn't award them all. It is what it is. You guys have a good rest of your long weekend. Get hooked.